But the problem with putting your ideas of heroism into the figure of a one man is that there's no way he can live up to it. Nobody can live up to that.
Hello and welcome to the Aspects of History podcast. My name's Oliver Webb-Carter and I'm the editor. And that was Keith Lowe you heard there talking about monuments. And Keith's written a book recently called Prisoners of History, where he has looked at monuments to people and groups of people and individuals from World War II. And he's looked at how a lot of these are controversial or problematic. And he's a very interesting historian because he's a World War II historian, but he approaches World War II at a slightly different angle and really looking at how the war affects us all, affects to this day. So that's Keith. Next week, we go into a little bit more detail with some of his other books that he's written. Particularly, he's written very interestingly on the bombing of Hamburg. And we also talk about Europe in the wake of World War II, in the immediate aftermath of World War II, and how it was just total chaos. And then we also talk a little bit about the impact of the war that the war had globally. And we even sneak in a little challenge that Keith did, where he tried to go on every single tube station in the tube over a 24-hour period. So that's next week. Elsewhere at Aspects of History, I've mentioned this last week, and I'm going to mention it again. We've got the unpublished historical novel competition. Details are on the homepage on our website, so have a look at that. It's aspectsofhistory.com. If you have not written a novel and want to, write it, and then you can submit it. The prize is £500, and the novel will be published by an independent publisher, one of the leading independent publishers in the country. So, I heartily recommend it. If you know anyone who's written a novel, recommend them to do it as well. So, to get them to apply. It's a no-brainer. £500 to the winner. Also, to commemorate the Queen and her 70-year reign, which the anniversary was in 6th of February, we've got a nice article on the homepage again from Matthew Dennison, all about the Queen. Now, I learned a little fact about the Queen this week, which I thought was quite nice. The Queen's favourite cereal is Special K. Did you know that? Elsewhere, our magazine is available for annual subscription for only $9.99. So Valentine's Day is coming up, and if you really want to to show your love, I would recommend an annual subscription from Aspects of History at only $9.99 for a year. That's insanely cheap, and your loved one will love you even more. Coming up next week, where the new magazine is out on Tuesday, the 15th of Feb, we've got an exclusive interview with Bernard Cornwell, the great historical novel writer, author of Sharp series of novels, and also the Uhtred Last Kingdom novels. So have a look at that magazine, which is out on Tuesday. If you want to get hold of me, it's at Twitter. I'm at OllieWCQ. That's OLLIEWCQ. Do get in touch. I'd be happy to talk about anything that you've heard so far. And without further ado, I will hand you over to me talking to Keith. Keith Lowe, welcome to the Aspects of History podcast. Right, so I have you on to talk about a few of your books that you've written, and they're all really very interesting because you're a World War II historian, but you seem to approach World War II at a slightly different angle to other historians. Which I find very interesting because there's a running theme throughout all the books that you've written that seem to be mainly about the impact of war it has on the people of Europe and wider. Now, your most recent book, I thought we'd start off talking about, which is Prisoners of History. And this is a book about, I think it's 25 statues that have been erected to commemorate World War II.
Yes.
So Keith, first of all, I wanted to ask, and this was published at the height of the, I've ended up calling them the Statue Wars. Is that probably the name of the, the whole?
Yeah, all the controversy that happened in the summer of 2020 when all those statues are being torn down in various places around the world, including here in London. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I mean, that I guess in a way was a happy coincidence, because it meant that your area, your book was well very closely related. But I wondered how it did fit in, because they are limited to World War II monuments. So
exactly.
We're not going down the road of BLM or anything. But how do you think your approach to the World War II monuments fits into the wider statue debate?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're right. It was a sort of happy coincidence in that the book came out literally a month after all this controversy was all going on. But also, yeah, it is about the book is about World War II, as you say, not about racism or colonialism or anything like that. On the other hand, a lot of the themes are actually the same. I mean, this is not, statues and monuments are not really so much about actual history. It's about how we remember that history. They're usually, they are there to commemorate a sort of history, but they're also there to put down a sort of statement of our values, of our what's important to us as a society, whether that be bravery or nationalism or some other kind of sort of virtue, or a commemoration of some kind of victimhood or something. Those sorts of things play into all the same ideas that were coming out in the Black Lives Matter movement and the anti-colonialist stuff and so on. What are our values? Do we need these statues to stay up, or should we tear them down if our values have changed? The idea of victimhood, especially, is something really powerful. There are very real victims of history, and should we be commemorating things to the people who perpetrated acts upon those victims, or whose point of view are we looking at history from? All those sort of questions all come into how we remember the Second World War, just as how we remember any other subject.
It's interesting you say that, because when a lot of these statues are erected, and that's something that I was just thinking of when you were just going through that, because a lot of these statues, when they're erected, they're erected through, we don't have a sort of national plebiscite in this country to decide what goes up. There are some statues, I assume, that are erected as a result of rather small committees being mentioned and money raised. And then you've got in other countries more state intervention, I guess, the obvious ones being the Soviet commemorations. So when we talk about these statues as saying what they say about us, is it really more that what we're saying, what a small group of people is saying about themselves or the Soviet government at the time?
Absolutely. I think in order to get a sort of proper snapshot of what a society really thinks about its history, taking one statue or one monument is possibly not the best way to go. I mean, like you say, you do get a very narrow view then. I think a good example of where it's been done well is somewhere like Amsterdam, which I cover in the book, where there is a national monument to the Second World War, which was very problematic at the time, because it commemorated the victims around the Netherlands in each of the different regions of the Netherlands, and it's a very sort of Christian image on this. It's got the nation as a sort of figure crucified on this pillar. all of which is a little bit problematic if you're Jewish. And of course, most of the victims of Nazi brutality in the Netherlands during the Second World War were Jewish. So they're not even commemorated on this supposedly national monument. But if you then look around the rest of Amsterdam, there are all kinds of other sort of, they realized their mistakes sort of late in the 60s or so, 60s, 70s, 80s and onwards. And so they started erecting all kinds of monuments to the Jews who were killed in the city or taken out and murdered elsewhere. And so now if you put together all of those, and there's also a monument to homosexuals who are also persecuted, gypsies as well. You take all these different monuments, you form a sort of mosaic of history, and that gives them a sort of more rounded view of memory of what happened.
Yeah,
that's a good example.
Yeah,
but there are lots of bad examples as well. So,
well, one memorial that I was looking into from your book was the memorial to the victims of the Jewish victims of the Holocaust, that is in Berlin, that I think the Germans put up, and it's a bit of a strange memorial, isn't it? It's quite controversial, is probably fair to say, in that it seems to be. I mean, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but having looked into it myself, it seemed like the Germans had this collective guilt over the Holocaust, and so built this memorial with the best of intentions, but it has caused a few problems, hasn't it?
Yes, I mean, like every memorial, and certainly every memorial in the book, it is controversial. I mean, it's vast, is the first thing to say. It takes up a huge amount of space right in the very center of the city. I mean, this is prime real estate. Anywhere else, you'd imagine it'd have a massive hotel built on it or something. But there, they've taken up a whole block. What could have been a whole block is covered in these sort of they're almost like tombstones, I suppose. I mean, that's the image that immediately comes to mind. Rows and rows and rows of them of different heights, which when they get really tall, they form sort of canyons between them. You can walk between them, and it sort of blocks out the light on either side. And some of them are very small, and you can see over the top of them. But altogether, it gives a sort of almost like a feeling of being in a cemetery. Now, the sculptor who made it, the architect who made this, steadfastly says that wasn't his intention. It was supposed to be just an abstract sort of idea, but it does feel like that when you're looking at it. And it was controversial because, well, I mean, they didn't properly consult with the Jewish population of Berlin, or indeed anywhere. They just sort of decided to do this thing. Lots of Jews were quite upset about it and thought it was sort of a way of expiating German guilt rather than actually commemorating them or their families and so on. And the other thing about it is that there is nowhere on this monument which says what it is. So you can turn up and you'll have no idea that it's a monument to the murdered Jews of Europe, because there's no sign, there's nothing there to explain anything. So they had to fight in order to get the German parliament had to sort of argue for like an information center at least, which they built underneath it, much to the annoyance of the architect, who wanted it to be a very sort of abstract thing. And so you have to go through this sort of obscure little doorway and down underneath, and there in the information underneath is a kind of sort of mini Holocaust museum, which tells the story of what actually happened in Berlin and around Europe. So it's sort of got lots of layers of problems which have been sort of partially solved or not really, and nobody's properly content with the result.
I guess it's related though to I mean a lot of the camps that existed are still intact. I mean, I'd visited Sachsenhausen, just outside Berlin, and also Auschwitz. And they are almost, I mean, they're not monuments, but they are certainly, I mean, they feel like when you're there that you are almost, even though they're actually not monuments, it feels like they are in a way, because you're there to sort of remember or to think about what the Holocaust was. And that works, I mean, better than any other way, I would imagine, for visitors to understand what the Holocaust was and what actually happened. Is that in some way related to what the Germans have been doing in with their monuments? In that they've got, I think Dachau outside Munich is also still intact.
Yeah.
So it gives that rounded.
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's a sort of common language of Holocaust memorials and museums and so on around the world, which people have kind of become familiar with, but by visiting sort of more than one. They do have this sort of common sort of theme. It's very somber and so on. The architect who created the Berlin Memorial wanted to do something different. He didn't want you to sort of just slot into like a ordained sort of way of thinking. He wanted you to wander through and have your own thoughts about what the Holocaust meant and so on. So I can understand his point of view, but it was problematic. But on the other hand, those sort of monuments, I suppose, to the concentration camps, those sort of memorials, are in themselves a little bit problematic for other reasons. I mean, they've almost become tourist attractions in some way.
Absolutely.
You go to Florence, you go to see the Uffizi, and then you go to Paris and you climb up the Eiffel Tower, and you go to Berlin and you get to see whatever, and then you go to Auschwitz, and it's sort of like on the tour almost, and that makes me very uncomfortable. And you sort of arrive, and there's sort of there's a gift shop, and and then you might need something to eat. And is it all right to sort of have a picnic somewhere nearby when the people who actually died there were starving? It's very uncomfortable. Which I suppose is not a bad thing, to feel uncomfortable every now and then, but
but maybe for the wrong reason. I know exactly what you mean. And another thing I was thinking is when I went to Sachsenhausen soon after the wall came down, and the Soviets who were leaving when they had arrived, I think they had found the camp, and they'd left it how it was, because they were keen to show what the Germans had done. So in a way, that gave it an additional kind of political approach to it, in that they were desperate to show how terrible the Germans were and how how they were liberators, which they were. But again, that's a sort of a political decision in a way.
Yeah, and I mean, there are decisions around how you leave the camp. Do you clean it up? Do you try and preserve it exactly as it is? In which case you're then sort of having to renovate the crumbling stuff to make sure it doesn't crumble too far, or do you just allow it to just crumble into dust? In which case, some of the structures of the buildings and crematoria and so on are lost. There are all sorts of decisions you've got to make about how you're going to preserve or not the sort of symbols of the past.
And then I guess they're not sort of right or wrong ones as well sometimes. So
I mean, for example, one of the other places that's not related to the Holocaust in the book is Oradour-sur-Glane in France, which is a village where the entire population was massacred by the Germans, and the French government decided they were going to sort of freeze it in aspic, leave it precisely as it was on the day when the massacre occurred. But that means you've got like a rusting car that was sort of a doctor in the village was shot in there. And do you stop it from rusting? And they've done sort of things like take it away, spray it all with preservative and put it back and repair bits to how they might have been in 1944 and try to make it look like it was then. And that makes you think, well, aren't you sort of Disneyfying it in a sort of way? You're fetishizing this one moment and trying to keep it alive, even though the natural course of time would be slowly erasing it. It's sort of weird, these decisions that have to be made.
Speaking of weird, now there's the one monument that towers all over where it's based in Volgograd, formerly Stalingrad, which I think you've said is your favorite, or I don't know, yeah. But it's insanely large. It's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous.
I mean, our listeners should go to the Wikipedia page. I'll put a link of it into the show notes, because I think there's a picture in the Wikipedia page that show. I mean, obviously they should buy the book, and it'll be in there. And the scale it's just ridiculous. So yeah, why is that your favorite? And that's built quite recently as well.
Well, I mean, it was built in the 60s.
Right.
So it was sort of a generation after the war. And at the time it was built, it was the biggest statue in the world. I mean, it's way bigger than the Statue of Liberty, for example. It's just to let people know, it's that statue, which is it's a woman standing in a sort of Greek gown, holding up a sword in her hand, and with her other hand beckoning. She's like beckoning to the armies of Russia to come and defend her. It's called, the title of the statue is "The Motherland Calls," and you're right, it's absolutely immense. I've got a photo of some people standing at the foot of it, which I took from a distance, and like there's a fully grown 6 foot tall man standing right next to the bottom of this, and he's the same size as her big toe. That just goes to show how huge it is. But I mean, that's the one thing that the Soviets always really did well. Just the scale of things. They put you in a sense of awe just by being there. I mean, you could feel the weight of this thing above you when you stand underneath it, and that's important. The feeling you get from something is a big sort of important part of the experience of seeing monuments like that.
And the Soviet memorials that they erected for the leaders. There's Grutas Park in Lithuania, I think,
mm-hmm.
that is also really interesting, where you have Stalin, Lenin dotted around. Why has that been? Why is that how it is, and not being sort of completely destroyed? Soviet Stalin being removed like he has been in Poland and places like that.
Yeah, you're right. In Poland and Ukraine, actually, they've removed all sort of traces of Soviet influence. For their own political reasons, they don't want to have these things celebrated, because as far as they're concerned, it was the Soviets who occupied their country every bit as much as the Nazis did. So they shouldn't be celebrated. In Lithuania, they took a sort of different point of view, which was to gather up all of these old monuments. And at first, they didn't know what to do with them. They sort of left them in warehouses, and a couple of them on scrap heaps and so on, just sort of sitting there in the elements. But eventually, they decided that this is for better or worse part of our history, and we should do something with it, either put it in a museum or I don't know, something. And so they put it out to tender, and the problem was that a few museums and so on bid for these to sort of take these statues on, but they all wanted to be paid for it, because it costs money to renovate these things and to house them and to put them on display and so on. But there was this one other guy who said, no, I'll do it all for free. I'll pay for everything, and I'll do it. But he wasn't a museum professional or anything like that. He was a mushroom farmer in the south of the country. He was a millionaire, and he put them all in some fields next to his mushroom farm, And in order to pay for it, he sort of made it into a bit of a theme park. So there's like they've got a zoo there, and they've got a playground for the kids, you know, and there's some little statues of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So you know, the kids are playing on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and next door there's statues of Stalin and like disused tanks, and then they put around the outside of this these fields, they put these sort of barbed wire fences and these like watchtowers with these dummies of soldiers looking down, almost like you're in a gulag or something. And but they're very obviously dummies, and they haven't even bothered to try and make them look real. They've got no faces or anything. And then they blast out all this sort of Soviet era music over the loudspeakers. So it's a completely bizarre experience. It's very weird, but it's sort of, in a funny way, works, because I mean, the idea is that he's ridiculing these things. He's ridiculing Stalin. He's ridiculing Lenin and so on. So you go along and you they're not scary anymore. You kind of laugh at them. You got a field with Lenin in it, and it's got llamas walking around it. I mean, it's just bizarre. So yeah, it kind of works, but it did put a lot of people's backs up in as you can imagine. People who might have suffered under the regime were not entirely happy about this. But for me, I loved it. I thought it was great.
Yeah, that's the difficulty with them. Everyone's got so many different interpretations. When I've seen pictures of it, it reminds me of GoldenEye, the film GoldenEye. There's a scene where where Bond is running around a park in Leningrad, I think, or St. Petersburg, with old statues of Stalin everywhere. But yeah, it's a difficult line to walk, isn't it? Now, one thing I was reading that you had written about with Churchill and statues, because Churchill is obviously, you know, he's an iconic figure for most people in Britain, and that obviously was controversial during the summer of 2020 with the Churchill being racist, daubed all over the statue. And I know in a previous interview you'd mentioned that it was a clash of values. The way the Churchill statue was dealt with was a clash of values. I was just interested to explore that a little bit, because I thought part of the reason why people were daubing all over Churchill, it was racist, because it was so provocative. You know, people doing that knew they were going to wind other people up, which I guess is that clash of values. But I was just wanting to talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I mean, I should say at this point that I mean, there are, this book I've written is not just like a list of statues. They're gathered together in themes. So you know, there are the statues to heroism, there are the statues to victimhood, there are those to the monsters of the war, like Stalin or Hitler or whatever. Mussolini's another one. So these are sort of themes that are quite common to the way we remember not only the Second World War, but all kinds of things. And the statue to Churchill, that statue isn't, by the way, in the book, but the same sort of principles apply. He's one of the heroes of the war. That's how we remember him, as one of the heroes. But the problem with putting your ideas of heroism into the figure of one man is that there's no way he can live up to it. Nobody can live up to that. I've got a chapter in the book about a similar statue to Douglas MacArthur, one of the most vain, arrogant leaders, a very good military commander, but horrendously vain and did all kinds of very controversial things. Making people like that into this symbol of heroism immediately opens the door to people saying, well, hang on a sec. He wasn't a hero. He did this, he did that. He was slightly racist. With Churchill, he was often drunk. He made stupid decisions as well as good ones. He opposed equal pay for women. I mean, all kinds of things. And the problem is that we're not really thinking of him as a human being. The human being Churchill is irrelevant. Forget him. He's a symbol. He's supposed to be this symbol of heroism. But for people on the left, people who anti-colonial protesters and so on, he's not a symbol of heroism. He's a symbol of Victorian values, which should have gone long before the Second World War. So once you get this clash of values, it's just different ways of looking at the same thing. If they'd have put, instead of making a statue to Churchill and made it a sort of generic hero without a name, then there would be no problem. Who's going to argue against heroism during the Second World War? Of course, nobody.
Well, that's what you think. I bet you someone would find.
Well, I don't know. I mean, look at the cenotaph, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been one or two very misguided, like, people actually during the Black Lives Matter process.
Yeah.
Somebody did graffiti it, but they were immediately slammed by people of all sides. It was just a one-off act of idiocy. Nobody agreed with it. And that's because that is a monument to all of us. It's a very uniting thing, and it's to heroes and victims of both the First and the Second World Wars. And you can't really argue with that. That's the whole point of the cenotaph, is that it hasn't got anybody recognizable in it. They're nameless, they're unknown soldiers. And so that's what makes it immune to all of the problems that other ones have suffered.
Interesting stuff from Keith there. Next week, we talk about the bombing of Hamburg in 1943 by the Allies, when nearly 40,000 civilians were killed. So that is a difficult subject to talk about, but very important one. If you do like these, please, I would massively appreciate it if you could like or subscribe or give me a review, preferably a positive review. And if you want to get hold of me, ask me any questions, suggest anything, you can get hold of me on the Twitter. That's at OllieWCQ. But other than that, that's me done for this week, and we'll catch up next week. Thank you and good night.